Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am so delighted to be talking. Can I use the word legend? Is that okay?
You can use the word, whether it's appropriate or not is another thing.
I am delighted to be talking with comics legend Barry Kitson. Barry, thank you for jumping on this afternoon for you and morning for me.
That's my pleasure.
I've read your work as I mentioned before I started the recording. I've read it for some time and glad to be talking to you. I was a big DC Comics fan and continue to be, but really enjoy your work there as well as in other spaces as well. So, anything you'd like to share about sort of your path to comics? Were you a comics reader as a kid?
I was, and this won't mean anything unless you share the video. But just
Mhm.
recently, well, clearing my father's house, I uncovered the incredible Foamer versus Thorn Alado,
Oh, wow.
which I created when I was about 9 years old, and it's a thrilling adventure where only a person who could create foam could take on a man who's covered in thorns. Uh,
Nice, nice.
but yeah, so I began. Yeah, I wanted to be a comic artist from when I was about sort of 8, 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
First time I came across US comics really and saw Jack Kirby, that was me sold on it. As far as my path to getting a career went, much more luck than judgment. I
Mm-hmm.
was, oh, well, I start, to be honest, I failed my art A level, which is sort of the exam you take at 18. I got the same pass as I would have done at 16,
Mm-hmm.
as apparently drawing comics was not in favor with the exam invigilators in those days.
Ah, okay.
A lot of people told me that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, um, in that um, the people I knew who did go to art college were relentlessly was trying to drum that into them they shouldn't be drawing comics and that there wasn't a serious medium. So because we're talking back in the I guess 70s now, late 70s, early 80s. Um, but I kept drawing for my own amusement. And one day I went into my local comic shop and the owner said, "Oh, I showed some of your drawings to a well-known comics artist who was John Stokes." And he said to give you his number and get in touch with him. And I got in touch with John. He looked at what I'd done. He said he was comfortable giving me editors' numbers and I could use his name as a reference. And so the first place I took any work to was Marvel UK. And at the time they were publishing uh, Captain Britain and Doctor Who mainly. And I went down, I showed them my work. They said they liked it. They asked, "What have you had published?" And I said, "Well, nothing yet." And they said, "Well, when you've had something published, come back because we only use published artists."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I kind of said, "Well, how does that work? That's a catch-22. How do I, if everybody says that, how do I ever get anything published?" And they
Right.
sort of kind of shrugged. And but I asked them, I said, "Well, maybe you could give me a used script somebody's already drawn, but I could go away and draw it and come back and you could give me a critique." And they said they'd be willing to do that. And by sheer coincidence, they also said, "Oh, we're actually having a party tonight because one of the colleagues is leaving. You want to come?" So I went to the party and um, kind of got to know everybody there. And they never sent me the script. And I rang up a few weeks later and said, "Oh, I met with such an editor and he said he's going to script a script. He hasn't sent it." And they said, "Oh, well, actually, he's not here anymore. There's a new editor." So I spoke to him and he said, "Well, come down to London again, show me your work, see what I think." And so I went back to London, and Marvel was a big open office where everybody could see each other. And I walked in, and literally everybody there remembered me from this party for some reason. And so I was going, "Oh, Barry, great to see you again." And the new editor, who hadn't been at this party, told me later that he just assumed I was a stable artist there, and because everybody knew who I was,
That's
And so
great.
when I sat down with him, he said, "Well, all I can offer you at the moment is Spider-Man. Would you be interested?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, sure." And he gave me the script, said, "Go away, draw the first 2 pages. If I like them, you got the job." And again, by pure luck, Mark Farmer was inking it, and Mark was way ahead of me at this stage, and so he turned my naive doodlings into what looked like very professional work, and never really looked back after that.
Oh, wow. You were doing a lot of knocking on doors though. I mean, I appreciate the persistence in your story of going back and going back because there are people that would say, "Oh, the editor's changed." Oh, but that's a wonderful story.
Yeah, I mean, and what I took from that was the fact that if John hadn't gone out of his way to help somebody he didn't even know, and
Mhm.
potentially could have been a rival for his work, I probably would never have had an in, and I would have ended up being the English teacher that I was
Yeah.
for the rest of my life. So from that, I've always tried to help anyone else who I come across who I think's got the talent and the attitude to do well in the business to get in. I made some wonderful friends doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Spider-Man, the thing that always impresses me, the webbing. I mean, you got to have that minute attention to detail over and over again. Love the character, but some of those details, I'm sure, are a character
Yes,
building moment.
and there is a Spider-Man cover out there that when people ask me to sign it, I do finish off the webbing on it for them because nobody noticed it before it was published. I didn't notice it until I was signing it for someone, but at some point during the inking of it, I must have been interrupted, and I never finished the webbing down one arm.
Um,
The, but yeah, and so now when I see it, it haunts me.
that makes me feel better when I'm interrupted in a project. Now I feel much better. Apparently, that happens to everybody. So, I mean, it's almost a question of what haven't you done because you've worked on so many characters, so many storylines, with so many folks. And as I mentioned, I was a big DC kid growing up, and then made my way back around to Marvel. So Azrael's one of those that's one of my favorites, and the Batman Elseworlds work that you did, Legion of Superheroes.
Mm.
Um, yeah. Are there favorite books or favorite collaborations that you look back on fondly?
um, I don't. Yeah, I mean, obviously, working with Mark Wade is something I've done for over the last, I guess, 30 years now. So we have a very good working collaboration. But I've enjoyed working with everybody. I think some writers get more involved with the art, um, some less so. I always generally prefer the guys who give me an amount of trust and freedom. Um, Mark does that a great deal. We back and forth between each other. From he gives me a plot, I give him the thumbnails. He gives me a few changes, I give him page roughs, and that back and forth is really enjoyable.
Mhm.
Um, I don't get the same kind of fulfillment when I've just been given an absolute full script, and then you become um, just a means of there being an illustration as opposed to involved so much. There's
Yeah.
always a certain amount of leeway, um, but I do like the collaborative thing. I mean, working with Alan Grant was always a real pleasure as well.
Mhm, mhm.
For the LEGION run we did for 4 or 5 years. Um, yeah, I've been very lucky. I've worked with some really nice people. I don't think I've really worked with anyone that I've ever had any serious falling out with. I can't think of anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciated Alan Grant both with comics, but then he did a few adaptations of
Mm,
works too, so I got to read some of his prose growing up. So I appreciated him a lot, and sorry to lose him last year.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I love also what you were saying there about the storytelling aspect of it, because the images do tell part of that story. So it's great to find that collaboration between the person writing the script and the person bringing it to visual life too.
Yeah, it's especially good when you're working with a writer who understands comics, because occasionally I've had a few, like I've had a panel description of the lights flicker. So, no, they really don't in a comic, not in one panel.
You'd need at least three.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting, interesting. Any characters or storylines or anything like that that you'd want to revisit at this stage?
Um, I, I, I think I'm getting that stage where anything I revisited would be nice. Just
Hmm.
like, reacquainting with old friends. Um, I don't think there's anything that is kind of screaming out to me that that I left something unfinished. I don't think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it could be one of the things with comics is you also have to accept that things move on without you.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
you mentioned Azrael. I mean, I would probably love to go back to Azrael, but I'd want to pick it up from where I left off.
Right.
Uh, there's so much has subsequently happened, and it's kind of one of the difficulties I have now. I don't read as much as I used to anymore of the classic titles, because the characters have kind of morphed
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
much that I find it difficult to relate them to the characters that I fell in love with as a kid
Yeah.
and are still dearest in my heart. Sometimes I look at a character now and no, that's not right. That's not him.
Yeah, I have the same experience as a reader very often of recognizing that the stories change, they update. I mean, I think some of these publishers have restarted their continuities, and the thing that happens now is they seem to have multiple continuities. So,
uh,
but
yeah, that's what drove me to the edge of like I've got to stop by and trying to read everything because it makes no sense anymore. The same character would be a vampire in one comic that came out that month. In another comic, they'd have lost their powers entirely, and in a third one, they'd be in another part of the world. And it's like the illusion of a cohesive world has just it's gone out the window.
yeah, yeah.
But I think
Uh,
again, I was lucky that when I was 10 or 12 years old and I started buying comics, they were literally a couple of pence each.
mm-hmm.
Marvel were only bringing out, I would I would guess, around 20 titles a month, and I could literally afford to buy every title. Whether I was interested in the Western ones or the love ones or not, it didn't matter. I just wanted to have every Marvel comic, and you could afford to do it. But now, I don't think hardly anybody could afford to buy every comic that either one of the companies puts out every month.
Oh goodness, no, it's expensive. It's really expansive and expensive. Yeah. And the other thing about comics in the way that they used to be written is you could sort of jump from a month to a month. And I remember growing up, I might find like the third of a series of three, or, you wouldn't necessarily have to read that next issue because they weren't always as readily available as they are now.
No,
So,
no, well, particularly in England, and this I know this is true from talking to Dave Gibbons and other friends. We all had the same experience of American comics just came over as ballast on freight liners,
mhm, mhm.
and they were only distributed at the seaside to news agents near the docks, and they
Yeah.
came in absolutely no order whatsoever. So, um, one week you would go down and you'd get Avengers #1. The next week you'd go down and you'd get Avengers 64,
Mm-hmm,
and
hmm.
it. But we all said it kind of made it even more special for us because it was that whole treasure finding thing of I finally found issue 12, having had issue 11 and 13 for the last 4 years. I get
Hmm.
to know how they got from one to the other.
But
uh,
and that continuity was there.
yeah, I mean, it was there was a thing we had again. This is for the um, in England, some a comics company calling itself Power Comics started reprinting the Marvel books in black and white from #1s onwards. They would come out in comics like they were called Fantastic, Terrific, Smash, and Pow, and you would get, especially in Fantastic and Terrific, you'd get 3 characters per issue. They'd split the 21-page Marvel comics into 7-page segments, and you'd get it every week. But at least it gave you a chance to have that continuity, even if you didn't get it in color. And then that made it all accessible to us, which was good.
You mentioned that you like to sort of help those that are coming up that have talent. Any names that you're watching or people that you're particularly interested in, kind of following along with right now?
No, to be honest, I mean, I wouldn't insult anybody who's in the business now by telling them that by saying publicly that they're there because I helped them in any way.
Oh yeah. I was thinking more of like the upcoming voices and people that are out there.
Not really so much. I mean, since lockdown, I'm not experiencing as many people at conventions as I was. I mean, 10 years ago, I was going to probably 10 conventions a year, and meeting usually 1 or 2 people at any convention. There's actually there's a couple of young people from Europe whose work is excellent. There's a young Danish boy who's, I think I met him when he was 12. He's now about 15, 16, and remarkable progress, absolutely incredible. But it's always nice to see people's work, which is good. The difficult thing is when somebody comes up to you with a portfolio which is, you can't even try and find one good thing to say about it. Then it's horrible. I mean, you can still encourage people, but sadly, it's often the people whose portfolios are the weakest who have the biggest ego about what they've drawn.
Yeah,
and they're the most difficult to give any advice to. You get some funny things in portfolios. There's one, I can't remember whose it was, which is probably good, but somebody showed me their sample pages, and it was a jungle scene, and the story was all centered around a caged tiger, but you never actually saw the tiger. And I said, well, you really need, you'd see like one claw or, one bit of it sticking out of the cage. And I said, you really need to establish the tiger better than this, so that the story is clear and everybody knows what's going to. And it's yeah, but I can't draw tigers very well. I think, so why choose to make that your sample?
right. Or why choose to make a tiger be in the cage?
Yeah. I mean, for samples, the story could have been anything. But why choose something you can't draw?
So the advice I'm hearing for young creators is find those things you draw well.
Well, or just my big advice is just keep drawing. And it gets better. Don't worry about things not being great the first time you draw them, because they're not going to be. But just enjoy the process, and that'll come through in what you produce. The difficulty in a lot of people now is, they want to be a comic artist, but they don't want to put the years in before. I had one person come up to me at a show and said, at the moment I'm a teacher, but I'd like to be a comic artist. Would you give me some advice? And I said, sure. Then he stood there for a bit. I said, well, can you show me your drawings? Oh, I haven't drawn anything yet. I said, well, my advice is go away and draw something.
Right.
And then find out if you can actually draw before you decide you want to become a comic artist.
And the advice I've heard on writing is the same or similar from Anne Lamott. Put your butt in the chair.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a bit like you see on a lot of the talent shows. You get people saying, why do you want to be a comic? Why should we make you a comic artist? Because I want it. Just wanting it isn't good enough. You've actually got to work for it as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's honoring the reader too, putting the time and the
Yeah,
work in.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned conventions. I'm going to mention your Facebook page because it's a wonderful space that folks can go out and like, and I've enjoyed following the posts that you share there. Um, any conventions that are still go-tos for you, or any events like that that are relatively inviting and tend to
Well,
the pandemic?
my favorite convention in the US for many reasons is Baltimore. I've been going there, I think, for more than 20 years, and the only years I've missed have been the lockdown years. So that's kind of my go-to one. I enjoy a lot of the others, but that's the one where I first made a lot of friends. We all get there together. It's a very comic-centric show rather than a media show, which is great. I've done some media shows where I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, so what do you do?" I said, "Oh, I draw comics." "Oh, people actually draw those?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what we do." And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I love I love chatting about comics. I love other people who share the enthusiasm. Um, and as you said about the Facebook page, it's more designed more as a community rather than um, a vehicle to push what I'm doing. What I like about it is it's everybody there um, is pleasant to each other. We don't deal with trolling and self-advertising and things like that. It's just a nice space to talk about comics. I mean, we can argue, obviously, there are always those who are going to think the 5-year gap is either the best thing in Legion history or the worst. I don't take a stand either side on that one. But it's everybody respects everybody else. I think that's the main thing about it. And it's a joy for me because I post a lot of art there, which sometimes has nothing to do with comics. It's just things that I produce, and it's very nice to have people appreciate it and like it, no matter what the actual subject matter is, because then you think, oh, they actually like my artwork. It doesn't matter if it's Spider-Man or not. They like the artwork. So that's very rewarding, and it makes me feel good to go there every day.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. There's lots of more negativity and divisiveness in the world, and I find reading, creating, those are things that bring people together very, very well. So I appreciate getting to follow along there on the page, and I'll continue doing that.
And if you're very welcome. It's nice to have you there.
Well, thank you, thank you. And I'll share this as well on my page. And did I miss anything? Anything that you want to make sure to hit before we wrap up the episode? Hard to encapsulate everything, I'm sure, but I've tried to hit some highlights. I'm also going to say I appreciate your studio space. It's a very cool space, and noticing either vinyl or comics back there.
Yeah, that's vinyl on that side. It's comics beyond the screen on the other side. Lots of books. This is the digital end.
Love it, love it.
And the other half of the studio which is somewhat bigger, is where I do all the actual physical artwork, which I still get a bigger kick out of than the digital stuff. And then the digital stuff is great for speed and utility, but it's never quite the same as actually having a real pencil in your hand and a real paintbrush.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm old school, as you know.
And that's good. That's good. I appreciate that. I appreciate the human nature of what's on the page as well.
Yeah. And yeah, no, other than that, I mean, I feel like we've, which is always the case when I start talking, we've barely scratched the surface
Right.
of anything to do with anything really. But if you're happy, I'm happy.
I'm very happy, and if you think of anything, may the conversation continue. Always glad to talk with you, and thanks for being a positive force out there for young creators, and just a pleasant person to talk to. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Well, that stems from the very first comic convention I attended. I saw a fellow creator make a 12-year-old girl cry because he refused to do a sketch for her. And I kind of decided there and then that I never wanted to be that person, and so I've tried to avoid being like that. I mean, obviously, I have grumpy days, same as everybody does, but
Sure.
overall, I think I'm a big believer in what you put out there comes back.
Agreed.
I find being nice to people tends to bring you better rewards than bullying or haranguing people.
So true. So very true. Well, once more, I appreciate your work. I appreciate your time, and looking forward to staying connected and continuing to enjoy your work.
Yeah, please too. And if you ever do want to do a part 2 in
Yeah, love
6 months'
to.
time or whatever, I'm more than happy to do it.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Talk again soon.